doing? Well, obviously, I'm mixing up game mechanics. Most people don't want you to know this, but the hardest part of game development is actually learning the proper stirring technique. The secret is that it's all in the rest. I'm Isaac. I'm the developer of the indie game Ecology and wishlisted on Steam today. I've spent more than a little time playing some games like Terraria, Titanfall, and Hollow Knight, and I just have to do some quick math there. That's only 2 months of my life. But as I design my own game, I have to think about how to combine the mechanics that inspired me into something, delicious. I mean, fun and entertaining. So Terraria is a huge source of inspiration for me, and I, absolutely love the combat and the amount of options that you have for various character builds. The standout part of Terraria's combat for me is not really the invasions or the combat with the smaller enemies, but instead combat with the bosses. The satisfaction that you get from dodging wave after wave of attacks, especially when the bosses enter their rage phase, is just mwah. I also love that in Terraria you have this very free horizontal movement allowing you to run back and forth, but you have very limited vertical movement, and you have to strategize when to use your flight time or your double jumps in order to effectively dodge boss attacks. This also makes the movement accessories really fantastic and fun, so I knew I wanted to design bosses that mix storms of bullets and lunging attacks, while also forcing the player to really strategize when they're going to use their jumps and their flight time. I have 3 completed bosses so far, and I'm going to be showcasing some of my combat mechanics while fighting them, so you'll get a feeling for what Ecology's combat looked like in the rest of the video. I also wanted to build an accessory system like in Terraria, but I wanted mine to be unique and different. So rather than accessories simply giving players simple buffs like straight up defense and attack, I'm trying to create items with really interesting buffs that force players to strategize on how to effectively use them. For instance, I designed an accessory called the Particle Lamp, which summons a floating booster, or amp, that circles the players and makes their arrows and bullets significantly more powerful, thus incentivizing the player to line up their shots between themselves and the particle lamp. I also designed an accessory that creates a floating shield that lines up with the player's mouse, which can protect against projectiles, which can protect against projectiles, but not against melee attacks, meaning that melee characters still have to time when they want to rush in and get some extra damage against bosses. Speaking of melee characters, I know I said I love Terraria's combat, but honestly, the melee combat sort of sucks. Like, by the end of the game, the swords aren't even really truly melee weapons. They're more like sword-shaped guns. So I got to thinking, how can I fix that? You see, I just don't think that Terraria would work with true melee combat, because in Terraria, bosses are too fast in comparison to players, and there aren't enough mobility options to let melee characters effectively dodge all of the projectiles. This is actually a problem in nearly any bullet hell game. What makes bullet hell fun is that there are tons of bullets, but if you have tons of bullets, melee characters become basically unusable. So, this led me to my second source of inspiration, Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight probably has some of the best melee combat I've ever played. It just makes me happy. Part of what makes Hollow Knight great is the huge wealth of mobility options it gives players while they fight. You can dash and double jump, and, of course, you can pogo. If you haven't played Hollow Knight, why not? But the pogo jump is a mechanic where if you jump while attacking an enemy, you can jump again off their head, which means you can stay airborne and out of range of their attacks. Since melee weapons work a little different, I figured I'd just have it so that if a player lands a melee attack while airborne, they get another quick boost into the air. This adds a new level of depth to the Terraria-style vertical control mechanics I was talking about earlier. It means that you can keep pace with airborne bosses as long as you're aggressive enough with your melee weapon and time your attacks right, even if you don't have a jetpack or a double jump item. You can also pogo off of projectiles, which means that you can effectively bridge the distance between you and an enemy by bouncing off of their attacks. With a little practice, you can chain pogos over and over again like a ninja and never get hit by an enemy attack. But while Hollow Knight's combat is really tight, I sometimes wish that Hollow Knight had more varieties of weapons and play styles. So I'm designing a few different classes of melee weapons. I always thought that the parrying mechanic in Hollow Knight looked really cool, but it doesn't actually do much. Like, seriously, what does parrying do? I made it so that in Ecology, you can charge up a sword's parry by holding down the mouse button and then releasing it right as you're about to take damage. This unleashes a massive counterattack on the enemy. In the future, I might have this counterattack stagger enemies so that you can get a few free hits in, but that's for another time. I wanted to have options for a fast and mobile type of weapon as well as a slow and heavyweight one. So I designed spears, which are really fast and great at pogoing off of enemies. You can charge up some of the spears to perform a long jump, which allows you to clear ground really fast, or run away. The slow weapon gave me a problem though. Since Terraria's problem with melee weapons is that you're too slow, why wouldn't Ecology have the same issue? So I decided to add a hammer weapon, which is indeed very slow and heavyweight, but I gave it a unique charge special to even the playing field. Hammers can unleash a shockwave, which makes it sort of like a hybrid melee ranged weapon. But what's really great about the shockwave is that it destroys all of the enemy projectiles that it hits, so players can clear a hail of bullets in order to reach a boss. These 3 special charge attacks, parries, dashes, and shockwaves, help me solve the issues I mentioned before about bullet hell combat having too many projectiles for melee characters. By giving melee players options to either dodge, block, or destroy enemy projectiles, they can remain balanced with ranged characters. Speaking of ranged characters, I picked up Titanfall 2 last year, and boy, that is a fun game. But what I thought was really interesting in Titanfall was some of the fan-favorite weapons are actually the hardest ones to use. Weapons like the grenade launchers, Kraber, or the Mastiff are really difficult to master, but Titanfall wouldn't be the same game without them. What this taught me is that having easy-to-use weapons isn't always necessary, and if you can make unwieldy weapons satisfying enough, players will love them even more. But I have a challenge in incorporating Titanfall's mechanics into Ecology, because Titanfall is a 3D shooter, and Ecology is not. How do I replicate the fun of a 3D weapon in 2D? Well, I personally main Mastiff in Titanfall 2. The Mastiff fires a broad spread of bullets, which means that you have to be nearly at point-blank range to use it. But when you're able to land all of those shots, it is so satisfying. So I designed a shotgun that does very little damage per shot, but if you're close enough to land all 5 bullets that it fires, it has a ton of DPS. This rewards ranged players for playing aggressively and getting up close and personal with bosses. I also combine this with a mechanic from Terraria by letting you load different types of bullets into your guns. You can melt enemies by getting in close range with a shotgun and frag bullets. Just be careful, because sometimes the bosses fight back. My second task was to build a fun grenade-style range class. Ecology already has gases that serve as part of its ecological mechanics. You can set up methane pipelines from deep underground, or collect the freezing cold ether gas from comets. I figured I would use these gases as part of the grenade ammo mechanics. Methane explodes into fire, ether explodes into ice, and radon inflicts vulnerability, which causes enemies to take extra damage from subsequent attacks. I wanted to incorporate what I think are the 2 main challenges in Titanfall's grenades: their slow speed and their friendly fire. So I made a grenade launcher item that's very slow, but if you can land hits, you'll be rewarded with tons of damage and status effects on enemies. Just be careful that you don't blow yourself up. Finally, my biggest challenge was designing a weapon like the Kraber. The Kraber is probably Titanfall's most iconic weapon. It's a sniper rifle that's super hard to use, requiring you to perfectly line up your shot. But if you do, boom, insane damage. My main problem is that aiming perfectly straight bullets on a 2D map is, well, it's super easy. So how can I force players to line up their shots like they would in a 3D game? I decided to give this weapon, the ray gun, a laser sight. I named it the ray gun because you get it after defeating a giant manta ray. It's a very funny joke. I had it only charge up when players had the laser aimed at an enemy. This means that if you're not careful, you'll fire very slowly. But if you keep a steady hand and focus on your target, you'll do tons of damage. All this thinking about Titanfall makes me really want to add mech suits to Ecology. Which I cannot do because I already have so much stuff that needs to get done. But maybe. In the meantime, as sort of an intermediary step, I started working on a vehicle system. I really love the aesthetics of minecarts and games like Terraria and Minecraft, but I think they don't really have enough utility to encourage players to build giant minecart tracks. So I made it so that you can put anything on minecarts, like cannons. You can build really cool arenas with minecart tracks giving you fast but limited mobility and tons of damage. This was really cool because you can also put other items on minecarts. I added buzzsaws that you can use to cut down trees quickly and automatically, and auto hammers that mine crystals. I still think the cannon carts are way cooler than those, but that stuff's cool too. I'm gonna keep dreaming about adding mech suits to Ecology, but until I get around to that, you can check out some of the other content on this channel, and if it looked interesting, give Ecology a wishlist on Steam or hop on the Discord and chat with me a little bit. Links in the description below.